Vivek, good day. So nice to see you again. My only regret, it's not in person and that we have to do this over Zoom, but I think that our audience at the Global Wellness Summit will be very happy to hear from you.
Well, Rich, it's so good to see you, even if it's only virtually. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, as you know, when I had the privilege to work with the Global Wellness Summit leadership to develop a curriculum, we recalled your book and the timeliness of the book. And I mentioned it to the leaders there and said, there's this tremendous book, simple title, just called Together.
Hmm.
And I said, it has amazing information that's insightful. And I think the thing for me, Vivek, is that the audience that we speak to in global wellness, this lines up so perfectly with their beliefs, but they haven't been able to actually articulate this whole idea of loneliness and how it potentiates disease and so on, and accelerates cognitive decline, all of those things. So they talk about it in the abstract, the theoretical, but here it is in a book, simply stated, culturally relevant, health literate, and everybody can understand it. So I thought this is a perfect time for you to be able to give us the high points of what you've written about so eloquently, about the importance of loneliness in our world and how we can recognize it. What is the remedy? What is our approach from children up to very seniors? And of course, now having it even more challenging because of COVID, challenging the loneliness. So first question I'd have for you, Vivek, me included, and many of our predecessors have struggled with all of the aspects of loneliness. You stopped and said, okay, I'm going to put this together and articulate in a way that everybody will understand how important it is. What did you see that we didn't see that allowed you to make this commitment to bring this book out to us?
Well, Rich, first of all, that's so kind of you to to raise the book and to I really appreciate those kind words about it. The truth is, I actually think I was seeing what a lot of us, including you and our other predecessors, have seen, in our clinical practice and in our time as Surgeon General, which, I never was trained really to think about loneliness when I was in medical school or in residency. But what was interesting and what I found disturbing was so often I would see patients coming into the hospital who were in fact alone. And at really difficult times when I would ask them, when we had to, for example, have a tough conversation about a new diagnosis, or when we had to talk about a change in course of treatment, which was going to be difficult, I would ask them, is there somebody I can call to be with you during this conversation? And a lot of times they would say, I wish there was, but there's no one. And I was hearing that like again and again as a doctor, and I didn't know what to do about it other than trying to lend a sympathetic ear. I wasn't even sure how important it was in the overall care. But then what really tipped me, Rich, is during my conversations with people as Surgeon General, I just kept hearing these phrases that reminded me of the loneliness I saw in my patients. Like when people would talk to me about their struggles with depression, opioid use disorder, and concerns about chronic disease and violence in their neighborhoods. But then they would say things like this. They would say, I feel I've got to deal with all of these problems on my own. There's no one here to support us. Or they would say, I feel like I've been abandoned, or I feel like I'm invisible, and if I disappear tomorrow, no one would even care. And just hearing that again and again just made me realize, gosh, there's something deeper happening here. It resonated with my own personal experience too, just as someone who struggled with loneliness a lot over the years, and especially as a child. And that's what pushed me to just dig deeper into it and to ask the question, is there something more profound here in terms of the impact on people's lives than I had perhaps realized? And when I dug into the science, I realized there was actually. And in fact, that people who are lonely, that they do in fact seem to have worse health outcomes. We find now that loneliness is associated with increased risk of heart disease and dementia and premature death, but also an increased risk of depression, anxiety, sleep disturbances, and hosts of other conditions that you and I saw so often in the hospital, but I never really made a connection that maybe there was loneliness in the mix that was contributing to those challenges.
Yeah, I must admit, having similar experiences, but I just dealt with them as I saw the person that needs. So, you've got a social worker involved, you try and give somebody a hug. So we did our individual thing. But to put it together, to really define it as a dependent variable on outcomes was what I thought was so important about this book, that the mom or dad can read it, or the person that is responsible for nursing home or congregate care locations that are dealing with seniors. It's what's so powerful is the basic understanding of loneliness, and the sequelae of loneliness are the same across the board, and the potentiation of disease. And one thing I'd like you to comment on that was a particular interest to me, as you know, a number of years ago, I started delving into another aspect of the loneliness, but the loss of cognitive ability, and our seniors that were struggling, and understanding the science of neuroplasticity, okay, and basically exercising the brain so that it doesn't atrophy. And then this comes along, and I say, wow, this is another powerful tool. So the anti-loneliness is probably the best vaccine for preserving that. Can you talk a little bit about that? The preservation and enhancement of cognitive ability through the ages, as fueled by these wonderful relationships that you talk about.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you raised it, and I really appreciate your leadership also on the health of our seniors and thinking about how we build resilience and how we essentially enhance that plasticity to allow us to age and age well. And it turns out that one of the key resources to doing that are our relationships with other people. This book that I wrote was ostensibly about loneliness, but what I became fascinated by and encouraged by was actually the power of social connection, the opposite of loneliness, because I came to realize that it's not, our goal is not just to not be lonely, but it's actually to recognize that the more we have meaningful social relationships in our life, actually the more it enhances all dimensions of our life. So we find, for example, that not only does social connection enhance our physical and mental health, including our cognitive function, but it also enhances how we perform in school and in the workplace. It enhances, as communities, our ability to dialogue with one another. And I'll just say a word about that last piece in particular, the dialogue part, because in all my travels around the country, retracing the steps of my predecessors, Dr. Satcher, you, and others, what I found was that there were few people who felt that the state of dialogue in our country was healthy, right? Whether they were Republicans, Democrats, Independents, people worried that, hey, it seems like we're more polarized. It seems like we're more divided. Why is that? Why can't we talk to each other? Well, it turns out that one of the most important ingredients to be able to really dialogue with other people is actually human connection and relationships. And the way we all know that in our own lives is because when you go home for Thanksgiving or for the Christmas holidays, you may have a relative who has different political views from you, for example. You might think, oh, crazy, Uncle Johnny doesn't really know how to think about these issues. I can't believe he thinks like that, whatever. But you still sit together and have dinner. If Uncle Johnny was in a pinch, if he got into an accident, was in the hospital, you'd probably be there for him, just like he would be there for you. And the reason that we're able to talk to people like that is because we have a relationship first. But the interesting thing is, you don't need years and years of relationship to be able to facilitate dialogue. You just need to be able to establish a human connection. That could be that you both realize that you're both moms or dads, who are worried about your children. It could be that you both realize that you're worried about your parents and trying to figure out how to take good care of them during this pandemic. But the point is that if you want people of different points of view to come together and to be able to talk, the way to do it is not to throw them together into a room and say, okay, figure out your issues and your differences. It's actually to help them build relationship first. Yeah. And that's one of the things I realized in the writing of this book is that relationship is the foundation for dialogue. So whether we're seeking to improve our own lives, strengthen our families, make our communities more robust, or look at our country and say, how can we make for a country that's grounded in better dialogue so we can come together and take on big problems? It turns out that strengthening our relationships with each other is an essential ingredient to all those endeavors.
Yeah, it sure is. And although we won't have time for it today, unfortunately, we have a short interview, and I could spend all day with you on this because I'm as passionate about it as you are. And I see the issue of relationships and relationship building ties right into national security and other bigger issues that we're dealing with today. But for today, we'll stick to the book and understanding the patients that we have the privilege to serve in our world. And as we look at the mounting disease and economic burden that we had to deal with as Surgeon Generals, and spending 19% of our GDP, over $3 trillion a year, most of it spent on preventable disease. And when you put in mental health challenges, which are significant, which we still somewhat marginalize and haven't really come to terms with the issue of mental health, And then you layer on the loneliness, the depression. We look at suicide rates, our veterans coming home with 20 a day, that so on. And again, it comes back to these relationships and being together, as you say in the book, coming together to help each other. And it's almost like it's an antidote to offset the terrible sequelae of loneliness.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And there are two important points I want to make here on just what you raised, because I think what you said is so powerful, because you're pointing to the fact that in what seem like intractable challenges in front of us, whether it's our rising challenges with suicide or rising rates of anxiety and depression among our kids, or the wave of chronic disease that's hitting our population, that there are actually more resources, at hand than we perhaps may have imagined. And it turns out that when we can build relationships with others and human connection, that we can actually contribute to healing in a profound way.
Yes.
And I want to clarify what kind of connection we're talking about here, because again, thinking about the patients that you and I saw in the hospital, right, and recognizing that there were circumstances where maybe we just saw them once, right, and then they were discharged and maybe we didn't get to see them again. And so, but what's interesting, and this is something that Wayne Baker and Jane Dutton from the University of Michigan Ross School of Business have written eloquently about, and I talk about them in my book, but they talk about the notion of high quality connections. And they actually tend to talk about those as even over relationships, because what they have found in their research is that even when you have a brief interaction with someone that's positive, that's marked by kindness and compassion and concern, that you have a longer term impact on them than just those few seconds of interaction. And think about the last time you went to get coffee, and the barista or the person at the cash register smiled at you and asked you how you were doing and actually waited to hear what you had to say. Those moments when you felt seen and heard and appreciated, the good feeling from that can actually last for quite some time. And so as we think about how to contribute to connection, we should recognize that it's not only about how we treat the people with whom we have long-term relationships in our life, our family, our friends, but it's also about the interactions we have with our coworkers, how we treat strangers and people we may encounter in our neighborhood or in the grocery store. And finally, I would consider this, that if you recognize just how powerful relationships are, how they can help reduce overall our health risks and contribute really to the well-being of society, then you start to realize perhaps the most important part and message that I want to share, which is that all of us have the power to be healers, because all of us have the power to be kind, to be compassionate, and to be loving. And it turns out that, like you and I, Rich, have written prescriptions for some of the most powerful medicines in the world. And we've done that because of the beauty and advances of medical science. But what I realized in the writing of this book is that there are few medicines more powerful than love and compassion and kindness. Yes. And we all have the ability to dispense those medicines. We all have the ability to heal. And if you think to yourself, gosh, I'm the one struggling with loneliness, I need someone to heal me, then you'll be happy to know that one of the most powerful antidotes to loneliness is, in fact, our service to others. And when we extend that love, compassion, and kindness to other people, they heal, we heal, and we're ultimately all better off.
It's a beautiful message, a powerful message that is bidirectional. It's not only we're giving, you get some back and feel better. I remember in our training, medical school, and other things I've done, and I can remember years ago when the issues of adoptions came up, and you had these babies in these orphanages or had babies in nurseries with no mom, no dad. They just were there. And what was the remedy? They got retired grandmas and grandpas to come in and hold the babies. There's a relationship that's nonverbal. Just giving a hug, making that baby feel secure. And as you know, we can actually measure, oxytocin. We can measure hormonal response. You can measure immune response. And in fact, the long-term consequences of that are you have a better adjusted, stable baby who grows into an adolescent and so on. So it starts even at birth. And then we go to the end of the spectrum with our seniors, who often in our country, they get isolated. They retired from the job. The kids moved away from them. They're not close to anybody. And so they sit home with angst, missing their loved ones. Oh, we can do FaceTime now, but nothing's like a hug, okay? And when they are in various states of different housing that are assisted living and such, we see in many of our our colleagues at the Global Wellness Summit work in that space in assisted living and things like that. But I'm very happy to see that people are starting now to adopt what you've spoken about in the book, that it's not just about feeding and watering, but somebody needs to be there to give that person a hug, hold their hand, take a walk with them. So maybe talk about the spectrum of that and how you see it from birth to the final phases of life, and how important those relationships are, and how touch is so important as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so beautifully put, and you're right that touch is really important. Those relationships are powerful for our healing and for our development. And one of the studies I point to in the book, called the Koi study, is one that showed that even in children who have had adverse childhood experiences, trauma, if you will, in the earliest stages of life, that the differentiator between whether they went on to encounter profound challenges in their work and in their health versus whether they went on to do well in life was, in fact, whether they were able to establish a good relationship, a healthy relationship early on. So just like you said, that touch, that caring is extraordinarily healing. But I worry in particular about our seniors, because I think that one of my concerns about modern society is I think that we have underestimated how much value seniors bring to society, that we place such a premium on youth. And you see it in our ads and and how we market products, etc., that to be young is to be everything, and the converse being that to be older seems to be of less value, and the individuals are not as important. And that could not be farther from the truth. And the reason is, if you think about the example you just mentioned about the grandmothers and grandfathers and the love they bring to that baby who doesn't have a parent, and how healing that is, it reminds us that even in our older years, we still have the ability to love and to be kind and to be compassionate,
So
and
yeah,
sometimes even more so because we are wiser, right? We've recognized what truly matters in life. And that's what we're focused on. And I think if we looked at seniors that way, as people who have the ability to contribute to healing, who have the wisdom that so many of us could benefit from, I would think we would see them as just as, if not more important, an asset in society
yes,
as anyone else. And so that's what I really want. I would love for us to have a society where we saw all of us as having extraordinary value because we have the ability to build relationships, to create a sense of belonging in other people's lives, to heal. And the extraordinary thing about us as human beings, Rich, is that we are hardwired to connect. And so that means that even a little bit of interaction can go a long way, because we just when we feel genuine human connection, it's like a magnet coming together.
yeah.
We respond to it as human beings. We can make a big difference in people's lives.
Yes, so important. I'd like you to comment on this. As you know, our colleagues around the world are looking at this issue too. You've brought it to light concisely in your book, but I was intrigued that our colleagues in the UK saw that it was contributing significantly to the disease and economic burden that was preventable. And within ourselves, we had this tool, and they created this position of minister of loneliness. And it might have been named differently on a positive side, but I know the intent. But what did they see that we didn't see, that they actually assigned a very senior person to start looking at this to make sure that we can eradicate this because it contributes so much to disease and economic burden?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And what they saw were two things that alarmed them. They recognized the health consequences of loneliness, including how common it was. Because when I went to England and I talked to, the head, of the, Royal College of General Practitioners and others, they were telling me that so many, in fact, the majority of their physicians were seeing people every day who they thought were lonely, and they just didn't know what to do about it. But the second thing the government saw was the economic consequences of loneliness. They recognized its impact on productivity, and they had some studies which showed them that the impact was massive in terms of productivity and output, and in terms of retention and missed days, at work, etc. So that's actually what led them to elevate it to an issue of national importance. And they did that by asking one of their equivalent of the cabinet ministers or cabinet officials, which was one of their ministers, to take the issue on, develop a national strategy around it, and advise for interventions for how they could create greater connection. the UK is not alone. Other countries, have taken this on. Australia has recognized loneliness as a profound issue. Several countries in Europe have taken the lead on this.
Yes.
When I have gone to visit some of these folks, they've asked me, they said, what's the US doing as on a national level? We'd love to learn
Right.
from them. And I've had to tell them, actually, in some cases, you guys are further ahead than we are on a national level. But I hope that we can also, in the United States, recognize just how profound this is and put some national attention and resources toward addressing it.
Thank you, Vivek. That's so important. And, there's so many questions, so many, like I said, we could go on for the whole day or days speaking about this because it is so important and an integral part of our life. As we look forward, though, and I wish we had more time to speak about the impact of COVID, creating more isolationism and potentiating that. But as we wrap it up, what's the message that you can give to all the listeners who are aligned with us in pursuing optimal health and wellness in the Global Wellness Summit and the Global Wellness Institute all over the world aligned, which is a powerful network of people who really love this type of information that they can incorporate? What message can you give them in parting that will make their communities better, their practices better, and so on?
Well, I would first just say to recognize that loneliness is extraordinarily common. And if you are feeling lonely, you're not the only one. And you are also not broken if you are lonely. We tend in society to say that, think that if you're lonely, something's wrong with you. But this is a natural human condition. The second thing is to recognize, though, that the steps we can take to create connection and community in our workplaces, in our schools, in our communities more broadly, including in recreation spaces, then we can actually contribute to healing in a powerful way. This is a time, especially because of COVID, when people are dealing with an extraordinary level of stress and anxiety and uncertainty.
Yes.
And one of the greatest bombs that we have, one of the greatest antidotes we have to stress is actually our relationships. They buffer that stress. They help us feel better. And so as you think about designing your workplaces for your staff, as you think about the services you provide to the community, just recognize that whenever you can bring people together where they can understand one another more clearly by sharing, where they have opportunities to help one another, which helps us strengthen connection, then you are helping to build community. You are contributing to healing, and you are helping create the kind of connected, cohesive world that all of us really need for us and for future generations.
Very powerful words from Dr. Vivek Murthy, the 19th Surgeon General of the United States. Vivek, thank you so much for spending time. I know my colleagues at the Global Wellness Summit will be smarter for having listened and will be able to take these great messages home. And again, the book has all of the information, and I want to make sure that all of my colleagues are aware of it because it is packed with the information that we all need to create a better world. Thanks so much, Vivek. Look forward to seeing you in person in better times.
Thank you so much, Rich. An honor to be with you. And thanks so much for your friendship, your support, and all your advocacy you're doing around wellness.